People find it hard to believe that I wanted to be a garbage man. When I was a kid, I thought it would be the most wonderful thing in the world to ride on the outside of a garbage truck, holding onto it with all my might. At the time, I was still at the age where my parents forbade me to stick my head or arms out of the car window. Riding with your whole body on the outside of the car, wow. It's safe to say I never grew out of that supposed thrill. To say I wasn't popular in high school would be an understatement. There were some group activities that involved both boys and girls, but I was never with a girl. One day in the cafeteria, Connie Jeffers, prom queen and head cheerleader, came over to my table. "Hey, Wayne, doing anything Friday night?" I looked around and saw a group of girls watching and giggling. I realized what was going on. At first, I played along. "No, why?" "I need a date for a party at Mary Lou's house. Could you take me?" "What's wrong with Roger? Did his ego make his head explode?" She laughed faintly. "No, I just want to go with someone else." "Well, I'm different, that's for sure." "Great. So will you pick me up at 7 o'clock? "Hell no. Connie, I guess it's kind of like sorority hazing. You pretend to date the ugliest guy in school and then make fun of him in front of your friends. Thanks, but no thanks." You could tell by the look on her face that she was caught, but she tried to bluff. "No, I just thought you were. An interesting guy I'd like to get to know better." I knew it was bullshit. I was tired of the jokes, pranks, and bullying I was subjected to. It was time for a little payback. In a loud voice that everyone could hear, I shouted, "I don't care if you give me another spanking or not. I'm not taking you to the party." The reaction of Connie and the other students was priceless. That was until her boyfriend and soccer star Roger came over and beat the crap out of me. I didn't care. I was still laughing my ass off. The beating was worth it. He hurt his hand hitting my hard head and had to miss the district playoff game, which we lost. Tough nuts. I didn't come out of high school a virgin, however. My parents and Evie Sumner's parents conspired to get us both into prom. Evie was a little overweight. In this case, a little was about 80 pounds. The nice thing about her weight was that most of it came from her breasts. Her face was freckled, pimply, and round. Her red hair was impossible to tame. Bowing to bribes and threats, I agreed to go to the prom. After the obligatory pictures at each other's houses, Evie informed me that she planned to lose her virginity that night. I was fine with that. I had 2 paper bags on hand, one for each of us. For 2 people with no real experience with sex, we did well. But after a few finishes from each of us, she started calling out the names of the kids we were going to have when we got married. Several weeks of apologizing for breaking Evie's heart followed my "holy shit, you're talking" reaction to her mention of marriage. I never got good grades in school. I wasn't an outstanding athlete. I had no musical talent. None of the rare part-time jobs I got were of interest. My parents told me only one thing: join the army, learn a trade. So I went. I learned a craft. 2 years later, I left the army trained to kill bad guys. Yes, I was a groundstone mason. The positive qualities on my resume were that I could follow orders and live in shitty conditions. I wonder why not many job offers came in. That was the last time I listened to my parents' advice. I learned to rely on my instincts. Not the most reliable philosophy, but it suited me personally. The lack of job opportunities didn't bother me because all I wanted to do was be a garbage man. The requirements were to have a high school diploma or GED, be at least 18 years old, not use drugs, pass a criminal background check, and be strong enough to throw 25 pounds of trash into a truck. A lot of people had those qualities, but because of the extra perks I got for being a veteran, I got the job. After all, my Army career was worth something. For 30 years, I worked as a garbage man for the city, and I loved it. In the last few years, I became a driver, and my truck had one of those robotic arms that picked up trash cans and unloaded the contents into the truck. It saved the city from having to pay 2 or more people per truck. But it wasn't as much fun for me. I even liked that sometimes the trash would spill out of the bins, and I could get out of the car and throw the trash away myself. Odor. I bet that's what you were wondering. I wish I could say I was born with a poor sense of smell and it didn't bother me. Well, I can smell just fine. I'm just used to it. It's amazing what a person can learn to tolerate. I also had to learn that other people weren't used to the smell, and I had to be careful around civilians. My parents at least let me live in their house for a while. but they were happy when I had enough money to build my own house with a dirty room next to the side door entrance from the garage. I even had a separate washer and dryer for work clothes and another for civilian clothes. I had gone through several washers and dryers for work clothes over the years. While I also had plenty of cleaning, washing, and body odor products, some people always seemed to have a bad odor. I don't know. Maybe I just assumed they felt that way by looking down on me. To be honest, there were other reasons to shun me. I was physically fit, but they said I looked like I'd been beaten with an ugly stick. The best compliment I ever received was, "He's so ugly, he's adorable." Kind of like a bulldog. My mother and father were pretty humble. My sister inherited the good traits of both my parents. I inherited bad looks from both of them. Even if I managed to talk to someone, usually the question, "What do you do for a living?" didn't last long. I could come up with something like, "used materials disposal engineer." But if someone didn't like the fact that I was a garbage man, the hell with it. Naturally, I didn't have many dates, much less girlfriends. But I was single, so I did ask girls out from time to time. My favorite response to the usual, "Why would I date a garbage man?" excuse was, "Well, I know how to take out the trash, so I thought I'd ask you out." A good line for a laugh, but not good for dating. I didn't have many vices, so I was able to save money pretty quickly. My money was used to fund my personal life and also to prepare for retirement. Yes, I was paying for love. Since I was frugal rather than picky, I tended to choose cheap crack whores and hookers. Being ugly myself, I didn't much care what their faces looked like. I got more than my share of sexually transmitted diseases, but figured that was part of the price for cheap sex. Eventually, I became immune to antibiotics and had to clean up my act. For most of my adult life, however, I was known as Wayne V.D. Stallings. That's when I started saving up for a sex vacation. I traveled to foreign countries where prostitution was legal and somewhat controlled by the government. Although the cost was higher than street girls in the U.S., the class of prostitutes I found were usually at the level of escorts in the U.S. By staying with the same girl for a period of time, I learned to promise that I would come to this country again soon. As a result, these women were eager to teach me what they liked about lovemaking. I was a fast learner. Retirement in a country like Costa Rica, where hired women were beautiful, talented, and cheap, was not a bad option. The only problem was that the typical prostitute was looking for a rich American man to support herself and her extended family. I suggest you get a vasectomy before traveling. I was 51 when I retired with a full pension and medical benefits. What the heck is a 51-year-old retiree to do? There was no one my age to play with. I even considered taking up golf, but 3 broken clubs and 24 lost balls later fell away. I've always been a loner, partly because of my profession and partly because I'm used to it. My decision on what to do in my spare time was to mix what I enjoyed most in the military, namely shooting, with my chosen vocation, garbage. How do shooting and garbage go together? Can you say rats and coyotes? The city sanitation department I worked for allowed me to come in and kill as many rats and coyotes as I wanted, as long as it was after hours at a garbage dump. I had to get permission from the police chief because technically I was going to discharge my firearm within the city limits. He required me to take a course in safe firearms handling. No big deal. After getting my administrative blessing, I bought myself a .22 rifle with a night sight, night goggles, a folding chair, a flashlight, and a cooler. Oh yeah, and bug spray. The cooler would hold a 6-pack of beer, but I only took 3 at a time. After dark, I'd drive out in my old truck, the rest of the time I drove a Prius, that looked like it belonged in a junkyard, get my supplies, and sit down in a place where I could shoot and not worry about bullets flying outside the junkyard. I saw lots of rats, a few coyotes, and various other animals. By the time this story was written, I had killed almost 200 rats and 12 coyotes. I also killed a couple feral dogs that were probably escaped or discarded pets. I learned to cover my truck and myself so there was nothing reflective. This was not done for the animals, but for the people. I was surprised at how many people would stop at night and throw away trash so they wouldn't have to pay the $1.10 dumping fee. Sometimes I had fun with the women who came here illegally. I would attach a silencer to my rifle, a 2-liter bottle of Diet Mountain Dew and duct tape, and if I spotted rats, I would shoot behind them so the rats would run to the women. You should have heard the screams and yelps and seen them jumping up and down. Tell me, what TV show has such good entertainment? Every time I thought I had already seen it all, something new came along. One idiot teenager brought his girlfriend to prom night to make out. I think it was supposed to be a bet no one else has ever done that kind of thing. They didn't last long. I doubt he got anything from her that night other than vomit on the floor. Then again, maybe it was payback for having to take the girl his parents forced him to date. It had happened before. It doesn't matter. Now we come to the incident from which my story was born. I was sitting there, as usual, without much luck. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. A big car pulled up. Most of the people came in pickup trucks, but there were quite a variety of cars. 2 women got out of the car and headed for the trunk, which had just opened. I looked through my infrared scope, hoping to find rats that could be driven to them. Instead of the usual trash bags, they each took one end of what appeared to be a body bag. I immediately started taking pictures, even though I knew I would get very little detail because of the darkness and distance. After placing the bag on the ground, they returned to the car. Instead of driving away, they turned the car around. I realized they needed the car's headlights to see what they were going to do next. It was amusing to watch them step on things on the ground and go around them. Some of the foul words I heard included EEWW, shit, fuck, and OMG. How I hoped I could send some rats to them. They struggled to drag the bag to the edge of the big pile of garbage. They had to stop a couple times for one of them to throw up. But, without giving up hope, they did make it to the edge of the pile. The women went back to the car and pulled out 2 rakes. Back at the pile, they began raking the trash into a bag. As soon as one of the women said that was enough, they ran back, dropped the rakes, and drove away as fast as they could. I looked back through the scope and found, to my surprise, that there were rats running to where the women were. I learned a valuable lesson in hunting that night. Apparently, rats perceive the sounds made by new garbage as a possible meal. I started planning how to make sounds in the future to increase my score, but more on that later. After shooting a few rats, I headed towards the pile. Finding a stick that could serve as a rake, I opened the sack. It wasn't a body bag, after all. It was a wedding dress bag. I doubted anyone's divorce could be bad enough to bury a wedding dress in a landfill at 2 in the morning. I unzipped and discovered that there was indeed a body inside. A middle-aged man, quite good-looking, dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. The bullet had hit him in the back of the head. I looked for a wallet or other identification, but found nothing. I replaced some of the debris and made a GPS diagram of where the body lay. I returned to the chair to decide what to do. It wasn't worth rushing to file a police report. The guy wasn't going to get any deader. For some reason, my twisted mind said, this could be an opportunity for you. Why would 2 women kill a man and hide his body in a landfill? Obviously, they were hoping no one would find him. Considering the garbage in the dump adds up every day, they were probably right. The only people to worry about were people looking for aluminum cans or scrap metal. The women didn't think about the fact that there might be someone at the junkyard recording their actions. I needed to find out who was in that car. I took the card from the camera to my friend who does wedding photography on the side. After showing him a picture of the license plate, I thought he would say it was impossible to tell what the numbers or letters were. Turns out it was all about the backlighting of the license plate. Instead of giving up, he said, "I've almost got it. Ah, there it is." He gave me the license plate number, and I gave him $50. I then took the license plate number to the police department, where I have several friends, including secretaries. To one of them, I said in passing that I had the license plate number of the car that had hit my car and flipped on its side, and I wanted to see if the driver would agree to pay without involving the insurance companies. I told my friend that I was afraid my insurance would go up in price or be canceled, even though I was not at fault for anything. No problem at all. I got Harper Mullen's name, address, and phone number. She even showed me the guy's driver's license with a picture. Another $50 well spent. Now I had the name of the deceased. One of the women at the dump was probably his wife. I thought, hell, I could be a private investigator. It's so easy. Since what the receptionist did for me was illegal, I decided she would never risk her pension by telling on me, especially since she took money for it. Imagining myself a modern-day Sam Spade, I set out on the trail of Harper Mullen's house. The car from the junkyard was parked in the driveway. Just as I was about to get out of the car and walk up to the door, another car pulled into the driveway. A woman got out of it and walked into the house as if she lived there. She was the same height as the second woman in the junkyard, so I assumed it was her. I waited for a few minutes before I went to the door. After my knock, the front door was opened by a very pleasant-looking woman. The lock on the chain was still in place, and she looked out. "Who are you and what do you want?" "I was just wondering if you remembered to dispose of the rake after you used it at the dump." "What? What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, she revealed that she had a gun in her hand, pointed at me. I said, "I think you'd better talk to me before you pull the trigger." She and the other woman discussed the situation. "Okay, but I'll keep the gun on you at all times." I sighed like a silly blonde. "How are you going to close the door to remove the chain lock and keep a gun on you at the same time?" After some time of indecision on her part, I said I would stay put while she opened the door. Once inside, I was told to sit down in a chair while the two women settled on the couch. "Are you really going to point a gun at me all night?" "Well, I'm going to put it next to me. Just don't try anything. My questions still stand. Who are you, and why are you here?" "My name is Wayne Burks. I'm here to find out what I'm supposed to do about the two women who dumped Harper Mullen's body in the city dump the night before last." Looking at the woman with the gun, I asked, "You are, I presume, Mrs. Mullins?" Then looking at the other woman, I asked, "And I assume you're the one who threw up the most?" "What makes you think you have proof that something happened to my husband? And if it did, we had something to do with it." "How about pictures of the two of you in a junkyard with a wedding dress bag with your dead husband inside? It was from the license plate that I guessed who you were." You reported it to the police?" "No. I wanted to find out what was behind it first. Some people deserve to die. I killed a few myself in Afghanistan. So if you can tell me a good story about why he should die and make it worthwhile for me, I might not have to report it." The other woman turned to Mrs. Mullins and said, "Hester, this is a ploy to get us to confess. Check it for a wire." I laughed. "Lady, you watch too many cop shows on TV. I already have enough evidence to put you both in jail. And before you make up your mind to take me out, I have 3 copies in the hands of different people who will release them if anything happens to me." This was a lie I expected them to believe. Hester looked at her friend. "Damn. So much for our fail-safe plan, June." Turning to me and assuming a dejected look, she asked, "Okay, asshole, what do you want? We don't have a lot of money and—" "I don't want money." This was one of those momentous decisions I made on the spot, mostly because I had 2 stunning-looking women in front of me. I knew, using my head on my shoulders, that they could kill me at any moment or put me in jail and ruin the rest of my life. There are only a couple things I need. First, I need a story. Hester pulled herself together. "My husband works as a salesman for a pharmaceutical company. He traveled around the towns in northern Ohio, visiting mostly doctors' offices. He was a charming man and very good at the job. I had long suspected that he was, shall we say, spreading his pollen to other flowers instead of his wife. Somehow he managed to convince me that he was sorry and would be faithful from now on. He kept insisting that we not have children yet, because with his traveling, he wouldn't be able to be around to help me raise the kids. After a few times, it got tiresome. I was beginning to wonder if I was better off with or without him when I opened the door one night and found June here. June's eyes were watering, but she said nothing. Hester continued. "June asked if Harper was here. When I said I was Mrs. Mullins, she asked if I meant the former Mrs. Mullins. I replied that I was still his wife. June said, 'He told me he was divorced.' I replied, 'I think we need to talk.' I let her in. 'June, do you want to tell him your story?' June was clearly hesitant, but spoke nonetheless. 'I was one of the naive, trusting nurses working in the doctor's office where Harper came in. He was handsome and knew just what to say to turn me on. I was reeling from the breakup, so I think I was especially vulnerable. We went out every time he came over. He was the best lover of my life, and I was head over heels in love. We got engaged. Silly me, I even went out and bought a wedding dress. I was so sure we were going to get married that I quit my nursing job and moved here to be closer to Harper until we were married. I was going to surprise him, but the surprise was just for me. When I found out he was still married, I felt so depressed I wanted to kill myself. Hester convinced me that if anyone needed to die, it was Harper. June and I talked, then cried, then got angry, then started plotting revenge. I think our hatred fueled each other. Divorce wouldn't stop him from ruining more women's lives. We tried to think of ways to intimidate him into obeying me and June. My obsession with revenge was limited to extortion. Hester took a few deep breaths before continuing. After a few shots of liquid courage, I ran into him in the backyard where he was grilling after returning from his last sales trip. He was such an arrogant asshole that he laughed at me and told me he was going to keep pleasuring as many women as he could. If I didn't like it, I should just shoot him. I put the gun to his head and it went off. After I called June, she came and helped. The shooting was in the backyard, so cleanup was pretty easy. Mostly just turned on the sprinklers. None of the neighbors seemed to notice anything, and we were surprised the police didn't come. June and I had a few drinks to decide what to do. We put it in June's wedding dress bag, which is about the size of a body bag. The dump seemed like the perfect place because there is more trash every day, and no one wants to dig through trash. It wasn't until I got home that I started to realize what we had done. I started to get scared. How are you going to explain his disappearance? I was already approaching it. According to the plan we had devised, I cleaned out all the bank accounts to make it look like Harper was out of town. June's father was getting ready to retire to Belize. We talked him into going earlier than planned, taking Harper's passport and buying a ticket in his name. I paid for the ticket and gave him some money for expenses. We drove to the airport in Harper's car and parked in the long-term parking lot. I work in a jewelry store and have a lot of experience in repairing tiny watches and gemstones. I was able to replace her father's picture with a picture of Harper. The TSA employees would have had to use a magnifying glass to notice how I had cut the photo field on Harper's passport. Her father would then get rid of Harper's passport and use his own if traveling out of the country. On the way back, they only use facial recognition at immigration. I waited a few days before filing a missing persons report. Not bad. Seems pretty reliable to me. Apparently, we only proved we were fools since you solved the case in 2 days. That's our whole story in a nutshell. What else do you need to decide whether or not to report us? I want to have sex with you. What, you rude pervert? Who do you think you are? I'm just a garbage man who holds the rest of your life in his hands. A garbage man? What do you mean by that? Do you do things other people don't want to do? No, I was actually picking up trash for the city. In fact, I used to pick up trash in this house. I'm retired now. For fun, I shoot rats and coyotes at night at the dump. I'm one of the few people who are used to the smell. Now, let's talk about sex. You expect us to have sex with you, so you'll promise not to report a murder. Don't you realize that if you report us, you're committing a crime? Yes, accessory to murder ex post facto. Minimum sentence is 5 to 10 years. It's worth the risk. June interjected. How many times do we have to have sex with you? Hester shrieked. June, you're not thinking of agreeing to have sex with that... this thing? I interjected into the conversation in a Tweety Bird voice. Oh, you've offended my little wings. You can tell by my looks that I haven't had any beautiful women like you two find me attractive. And my quick wit tends to only take me so far. I would like to improve my sex life. To your question about how many times, June, I answer, I don't know. You may not want to stop. Have you ever thought about that? No! Both women answered at the same time. I laughed. Okay, here's a suggestion. I'll have sex with each of you once a week for a few months. By then, we'll know a lot more about whether your plan has any leaks other than me. Then we'll discuss the terms again, assuming you don't end up in jail. And then I might not want to keep having sex with you. Have you ever thought about that? Frowning and sighing heavily, Hader asked, Could you give us a minute, Wayne? June and I need to talk. No problem. I need to empty my bladder anyway. Where do I go to the bathroom? After Hester pointed down the hallway, I got down to business, giving the girls a few minutes to talk. I asked if they were ready and they said I could come back. Hester said, Here's the deal. In exchange for keeping quiet about Harper's accident, we agree to have sex with you once a week, but not for more than 3 months. We have another demand. We need you to help June find and pay for an apartment until she finds a job and starts getting a paycheck. It's too risky for her to stay in my house, and without Harper's income, I'm already going to have a hard time paying the bills. I agree with the sex restriction. However, instead of paying rent for June's apartment, I will provide her with my extra bedroom. Her living with me should not raise any questions linking me to Harper's death. It'll just seem like I got lucky. I promise not to bother her for sex more than once a week. She'll be able to make a living cleaning, doing laundry and cooking. The girls looked at each other and nodded affirmatively. Hester asked, "Which one of you wants to go first?" I replied, "You," meaning Hester. June asked me, "Do you want me to leave the room?" "No, I want you to watch." Heather agreed too. Hester told me to sit on the couch and take off my pants. I refused. Instead, I went to the kitchen where I saw wine. I brought 3 glasses and poured each of them a full glass. I asked the 2 girls to try to relax and think about the most romantic place they had ever been. I started and talked about Costa Rica, leaving out the part about getting sexual advice from prostitutes. I hoped they would find out soon enough. The stories ended about the same time as the wine glasses. Then I dimmed the lights. I then picked up my cell phone and selected one of my favorite playlists. The first one was Johnny Mathis and the great love song, Chances Are. I walked over to the couch and asked for Hester's hand. Pulling her to me, I asked her to dance. She stood up and we began to dance. I could feel the tension in her body. After a few steps, she joked, "I never thought I'd be dancing with a garbage man." "And I never thought I'd dance with a stone killer." We both laughed. She relaxed. Soon she leaned her head on my shoulder and nestled her whole body against me. "Actually, you smell good to any man. What cologne do you have?" "Paul Sebastian." We adjusted our bodies until we were completely comfortable. Hester seemed to release the tension, but began to cry. "I'm so sorry. I've been holding back my emotions since I shot Harper. I'm a horrible person, and my life has gone to shit. I don't know what to do. I don't want to go to prison." She sobbed. June began to cry, too. "Relax, let it out. We'll figure something out, together." As we danced to a few more songs, I began the next phase of my seduction. I started kissing her neck and nibbling on her earlobes. In response, she pressed herself even closer to me. "Thank you, Hester. That was wonderful." The now calm Hester spoke up. "I got a little carried away myself. The dancing was a nice touch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go clean up." I turned to see June for the first time since Hester and I had gotten down to business. June was sitting next to me and was clearly enjoying the show. She smiled and asked, "Is it my turn now?" I told her that I probably needed to recover a bit. She replied, "Let me take care of that." We ended the evening by agreeing to meet at my house for sex in the following weeks and to discuss how to handle the investigation into Harper's disappearance that was sure to follow. June followed me home, and we decided that tomorrow I would move her things in. I showed her the guest bedroom and the hallway bathroom. There were spare toiletries there, so she didn't have to go back to her motel room. It had been a long, hard, and strange day, so we were both ready for bed. After taking a shower, I fell into my bed. Soon, June walked into the bedroom dressed in just my t-shirt. "Can I sleep in your bed with you tonight? I don't think I could sleep any other way." "Okay, but only sleep, no." Before I could finish my terms, she jumped into my bed and bounced off my body. Quickly moving next to me, she wrapped her arms around my chest. Wednesday morning, Hester came in. She was going to call Harper's office and ask if they knew where he was. We discussed possible questions they might have and what emotions a wife worried about her husband should show. Using her cell phone, she called, "Joan, it's Hester. Do you know where Harper is supposed to be today? He went to Toledo, coming back from Cleveland on Friday. I thought he'd be done in Toledo by now, but he hasn't come home or called. His phone goes to voicemail. I'm starting to get a little worried." "Actually, we were just about to call you. We got a call from the nurses he usually hangs out with in Toledo. They were wondering if he was coming since he didn't show up on the appointed day. We told them he had something wrong and we are sure he will come or call them soon. Do you have any idea where he might be? No, I'll call his parents. Do you think I should call the Ohio State Police to see if there have been any incidents? I think you would have been contacted by now if he'd been in an accident, but it wouldn't hurt to call. Have you reported him missing yet? I thought about it, but I've heard that the police won't fill out a report until a person has been missing for 48 or 72 hours. I guess I'll call them, too. I just can't believe something bad happened to him. She said the last statement in a slightly sobbing voice. Good acting job, Hester. Now you better call. Heather called and found out she was close enough in time to file a missing persons report. We waited a few days and had Hester call the police again to say she was upset that they couldn't find him. Finally, the police arrived at Hester's home. She recorded the conversation and played it back for June and me so we could assess how well she handled the situation. In our opinion, she handled it pretty well. They started right off with the main point. Did she have any problems in her marriage to Harper? She answered quite calmly that yes. When asked to explain, she said she found out that Harper had girlfriends in other cities. When she talked to him after the trip to Cleveland, he not only admitted it, but stated that he was going to live with one of his girlfriends. As soon as he returned from Toledo, he would go straight to a divorce attorney. One of the detectives asked, "How did you feel about that?" On the one hand, I was upset. We instilled in Hester that it is very important to always use the present tense when referring to her husband, is my husband, and I have loved him for many years. As a matter of fact, I still love him now. On the other hand, I confess I was somewhat relieved. I don't need a husband who cheats on me. We discussed how to divide the property to cause me the least amount of damage. I appreciated that. How do we know you didn't kill him to get revenge? Hester went on the offensive. And who says he's dead? I wouldn't be surprised if he's somewhere laughing at all of us right now. After a short pause, she continued. Well, you asked. How do you know I didn't kill him? According to Hester, she looked at the detective with as much expression on her face as she was capable of. Then she replied, Let's see. I kill him and inherit all his debts without his income, or I spend the rest of my life in prison, as opposed to the other option where I let him live and get half of the estate and alimony for a few years. I apologize to both of you if somehow I seem that stupid to you. More likely one of his whores will kill him for not marrying her or getting her pregnant. Have you talked to any of them? No. Do you have names? That's all. If you want names, do your damn job. If you want to arrest me, do it now. If not, get out. Okay, we're sorry we upset you. We're just trying to do our job. Hester later laughed that both detectives spent almost the entire time looking at her cleavage or between her legs. June and I advised her on what to wear. She criticized herself. I was stupid enough to do something for which I would probably be put in jail or an almshouse. It was several weeks before police learned that Harper was on the passenger lists for a flight to Belize. His car was found at the airport. No evidence of a possible murder was found in the car. Although the police already had an inkling of Harper's whereabouts, a summons was issued to Hester's house to look for any evidence of foul play. She welcomed them warmly and even treated them to coffee. Her yard was combed by dogs, and several police officers looked for signs that something had been buried. The detectives thought they had found a major clue when they found traces of blood in the driveway between the house and the garage. When questioned, Hester simply showed them her leg with a scar that had scarred over. She explained that she had been taking out the trash, which contained broken glass. According to her, she mistakenly swung a garbage bag at her leg and cut it. Police took blood samples and tested them. It was her blood. There was no follow-up on Hester from the police. She was told that a message was sent to the Belize police asking them to keep an eye on Harper. His local case was probably placed in the cold case section. Time passed. Hester continued to work at the jewelry store. June found a job in a hospital emergency room. Shitty work, but it paid well. We made up a story that explained how June, Hester, and I became friends, well after Harper had disappeared. June and I were an unmarried couple who helped a friend. June and I went into a jewelry store ostensibly to get an engagement ring and befriended a salesgirl who had gone broke after her husband disappeared. Heather moved in with us. She continued to call the police every week with new news. Heather even visited Harper's parents and tearfully told them about his mysterious disappearance. Things were going surprisingly well in our house. The rule of only having sex once a week was quickly broken. June was proving to be very demanding in terms of sex. I had a hard time pleasing them both. I know the problem. Poor me. After a few months, a rift in our union began to appear. June stated that she needed more than I could give, especially if she had to share with Hester. She said she had met a male nurse at the hospital whom she wanted to get to know better. After seeing him for a couple months, June tearfully said goodbye. She took her bagless wedding dress with her. June's departure was like Hester and I releasing a chick into the wild. That left Hester and me. We sat down with a cup of coffee and discussed what's going to happen to us. I was so happy when Hester said, "I hate to say this, but I'm glad I won't have to share you with June anymore. Wayne, I'm sure you know that at first I thought I'd better not get involved with a garbage man. But you saved my life in so many ways. Maybe most importantly, you changed me as a person. You were considerate, kind, funny, generous, and caring. I know I love you, and I think I'm in love with you too. I want to stay with you." After a while, she smiled and continued, "Except when you go out to shoot rats." We continued to live together, mostly waiting until our 1-year anniversary so Hester could file for divorce because she had been abandoned. He still had some assets, titled in his name only, that could help Hester in her situation. She lost her home to foreclosure for non-payment of the mortgage. One day, Hester went out of town for a few days to a wholesale jewelry sale. I decided to stop by the Firehouse Bar and Grill to see my old scavenger buddies. I spotted Glenn right away. We exchanged stories from the past and had a few shots of hard liquor. I asked how the city government and the Department of Sanitation felt about him. Glenn reported that the bureaucrats have become an even bigger pain in the ass than when I was still there. He said that some tree hugger had recently convinced the city council that piling garbage at a certain height increased the likelihood of toxic chemicals from the landfill leaking into bodies of water. So they had to bulldoze sections of L1, 10, and M1, 10 to level them. I felt my heart racing. There was a wedding dress lying on plot M4. "What other plots will be bulldozed?" We had to stop. "Why?" Glenn leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't tell anyone, but you won't believe what we found."